So I've got a bit of an embarrassing admission to make. When I first heard about square foot gardening, I thought it was kind of silly because I just assumed I'd be able to basically plant out my garden beds without such a simple and easy system. And as it turns out, while I do think the first 6 months of my vegetable gardens has gone reasonably well, I actually lost a lot of efficiency by not following that kind of system. Now I'm going to divide this into two sides of things. Number one is the square foot aspect. So essentially what you're doing is you are dividing your garden bed into 1 foot wide by 1 foot tall, or however you want to look at it, spacings which allow you to really figure out how many plants you want to put in each. Now I've planted this garden bed out with broccoli, and this is my first garden that I'm following the square foot approach. And it's important to note, while I think I might have one of the square foots not filled out, I've actually followed that system quite closely here. And I did it in a bit of a bodgy way. I just laid the various things I had laying around my garden, which I've been using to trellis up plants, across the garden bed to get that spacing right. So on the one side of things, we've got basically the spacing of the plants. And the really, really good thing about this, I find, is that you can go online and you can look up all of these different graphs which will give you how many plants you can fit in each square foot, which with these broccoli was one. So one per square foot. I think this is a 1.2 by 0.9 meter bed. I'm basically going with 30 centimeters as a foot, which I think is a bit larger than it actually is. And that gives us 12 squares here, which of course, naturally gives us the opportunity to plant 12 squares worth of plants. Now I had 9 or 10 broccoli. I had an existing chili which got transplanted, and I've actually got kind of an oregano over in the corner there. So technically all of these are full. So why is this now in my mind a better system? Well, when I look at my other garden beds, most of them I underplanted quite drastically. And so what has actually happened is I've not ended up with the crop that I really ideally should have. I think also I probably could have mixed a greater variety of plants into my garden bed, so I would have got more efficiency, but also a better kind of variety of things that I was growing, not only as a whole and as far as getting a crop that I can eat, but also for each of the garden beds. And I do think variety is a good thing. In saying that, filling one garden bed almost purely with broccoli is probably not the best way of demonstrating that to you and the lessons I've learnt. But that was mainly because this was the garden bed I had available really easily. Now, putting that aside, the other aspect of square foot gardening that I kind of stumbled across very, very recently, just in a video that I was watching the other day, was that the soil mix is really important as well. Now, I've had various problems with the soil, and what I came to realize was the square foot gardening soil mix puts quite a strong emphasis on having better aeration and water retention for your soil. And the reason I found that really interesting is because I've been buying coconut coir from a local tomato plantation, I don't know, farm, whatever you want to call it. They grow their tomatoes directly in the core, and basically once they're done with it, you can buy it. The reason I was buying that was because I figured it was a really good water retention option to mix in with the quality gardening soil I was buying in bulk. So I was getting that delivered by truck. And that certainly has been the case. Now, some vermiculite, I think, or there was another option as additives to your soil was basically something that was recommended. I think coir was your backup option. And then there was another aspect of the soil which has totally gone from my mind. But with that being said, one of the things I have learnt the hard way, and not so much in this bed, I basically mixed a really cheap bagged garden soil with some compost and came out with a very, very poor result. So when I've come back and done the square foot gardening here, the first thing I tried to do was more closely match the soil mix that they were talking about. So I've added my quality potting. So I've added my quality garden soil here, which I purchased and asked basically for something really suitable for vegetable gardens. And then what I added in was my coir, which I think there's a little bit here. It does have dead tomato roots all through it because it's secondhand, but it was very, very cheap. It was about $3 for 18 litres for a big long bag. And as a result, I could mix it in quite easily with the addition of my quality soil. And then I actually put in a little bit of fertilizer as well, just to give this bed a better chance, as originally, not only was the soil very low quality, but also I think it was quite compacted, and the garden bed itself was only probably half full after 6 months. It was more full when I started, but basically after 6 months it had compacted right down. Obviously not a lot of good quality organic matter in there, or if there was to start off with, which I kind of doubt, there no longer was. So I've improved my soil a little bit more in line with the recommendation that I saw for the square foot gardening. I certainly haven't followed it really, really closely. I'm quite terrible at doing that, but there you go. I'm a bit more of a free spirit. I will probably be cursing that later when I realize I should have been following it a little bit more closely. However, I'm just interested to see how this is going to go. Everything is growing quite well. Obviously, pests is probably going to be the big challenge with a bed full of broccoli, but I'm just very, very interested to see how this implementation of the square foot gardening system goes. And obviously, when I start going over all my other garden beds and getting the autumn and winter crops in, I'm going to be following this much, much more closely. Now, I'm not putting in any permanent strings or anything like that. I will say, I think personally, as someone who's done photography and videography for a while now, you'll be quite used to having the grid, and obviously gridding up your garden beds in your mind into that square foot kind of approach, especially as you do it more, should be fairly easy. And then it's just a matter of basically planting it out to suit, which is what I've done here. But while I really get into the practice of it, I am going to use my little guides, and that should make it a little bit easier just as a starting point. I don't think there's really anything much more to say. I've learned some valuable lessons from having all my garden beds in here. To give you basically a quick rundown so you understand where I'm coming from, this row here, I've got 4 garden beds like this. I did try and grow broccoli unsuccessfully when this one first went in, maybe 9 months ago. I had some tomatoes in here quite successfully. Will I say quite successfully? I mean, the tomato plant grew. I didn't get really good tomatoes out of it, unfortunately. The oregano did okay. This bed was overall a disappointment, I think because the soil was poor. Next to it, I had a garden bed which went significantly better. I got cucumbers out of it, which I was really, really happy with. Chilies growing in it now. We tried to grow some radishes unsuccessfully. The issue there was overcrowding and no radishes appeared. We also had quite a lot of pest attacks on that one. One more over, we've got some eggplant growing with some herbs, basil with some parsley, bit of a mix there. It went okay. And then the final bed right down the end had some parsley and some sorrel in it, and my zucchini, which went exceptionally well until I tried to thin them out and use the Epic Gardening tying them up a pole approach, which killed them all off in no time whatsoever. Not that I'm blaming the advice, I think it was a combination of me doing the 2 things at once that caused an issue. And then down from here, I've got a number of other beds. I've got 2 more rows of 3 beds, larger beds than these ones. I think they're 1.6 or 2 meters long and about the same width. And so I will be using this square foot system for them for everything essentially apart from my asparagus bed, which I'd say is pretty planted out at the moment. Anyway, if you've got any advice for me that you think will be useful, or any learning experiences that you've had that it looks like I might be online to come against the same problems, let me know. I'm always happy to learn from other people's mistakes as much as possible, even though it definitely seems the most effective when I'm learning from my own.